And while we do have a break, I'm reminded of something from our terrific interpreters over here, that when we do get to the public hearing phase of the day, as they said, if you could take a breath while you were speaking, because they can only go so fast. So, how's that?
The chairs are not available for Lamaze training if anybody was standing.
Morning. Good morning. So, I don't think you've mentioned your dad tonight. I have. And you're here with the council, and what's your name, sir?
Yes, hi, good morning, Dan Nuzzi.
Is the microphone on there? There's a little up. There it is. There we go. Well, Mr. Moore, thank you very much for bringing this one. I'm going to guess that when you took this job, I didn't think it'd be here in the legislative committee.
I think this job's turned out to be a little more than I thought, but it's a great institution, and it's on a great path, so it's all well worth it.
Well, welcome. Thanks for being here this morning. So we'd like to give you an opportunity to say anything you'd like to, starting off, and then some of the committee members may have some questions for you.
That'd be great. I do have very brief comments, and again, thank you very much to the CAT and the committee. I joined the board of Good Will-Hinckley about 5 years ago, and I joined it because Good Will-Hinckley changes lives. Every teacher, the entire staff, and the board is committed to Good Will-Hinckley because we do change lives. And every action we take from every employee and every volunteer alike is all about the kids that we serve. We feel that Good Will-Hinckley is a crucial part of our state, and the resources that we offer are truly unique and much needed. Our board is committed to the staff and to the students who have so much to offer to society that we need a little bit different path to success. The board has consistently acted as fiduciaries and tirelessly worked to keep Good Will-Hinckley on the path for long-term sustainability. Our job is to serve the staff and the students and the people of Maine who all benefit from this great institution. I want to talk just very briefly that we do change lives. In Hinckley, we see it every day. We see it at every graduation, that the students that graduate from Good Will-Hinckley would normally not benefit from their incumbent schools to get through school and to make it. For example, we have a student from northern Maine who had a very complex history that included abuse and neglect. His adopted parents ultimately got divorced. He had numerous educational challenges and persistent difficulties in school. He came to Good Will-Hinckley, and he's thriving on our hands-on approach to teaching. He graduated and has taken classes at KVCC and remains on a great path. We have a young lady from Central Maine who did well out of school but didn't really fit in. She was striving for a different environment, something smaller with a hands-on teaching approach. She's at Hinckley now. She has a paid internship. She's a leader on campus and enrolled in classes at KVCC. She's a senior, and she'll be looking for a 4-year college education. And lastly, there's a young man from Central Maine who had some learning disabilities, was not thriving in school, and has come to Hinckley and is really thriving in our hands-on, works in the woods and building things, and it's really turned things around for him. So Good Will-Hinckley definitely changes lives. That's why the staff, the teachers, and the board are all very enthusiastic about our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Are there questions for Mr. Moore? Representative Sanderson.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Moore, and thank you. The school does a great job with many of our youth here. One of the questions that I have, in the report, that was done and presented to us in the last committee meeting when we reviewed it. There was a real unique and extensive set of criteria that you were looking for in the role of whoever you hired as president of the school. By the time we get to the end of the report, that criteria had changed significantly. Can you tell me why?
Well, we had a pretty thorough hiring process that was a nationwide search. We got a number of applicants, and as the process carried on, we would narrow the applicants. And truthfully, this is a position that's unique. It's outward facing. The school has a very strong leadership and staff that do very well day to day. So this was a unique job that we needed to look at the applicants that we had and how they could best support the existing staff that we had. So there was some ability for us to be a little tactical on seeing the applicants that we have and who would best complement the existing staff. It's an outward-facing position. It's somebody that we needed. There were definitely some areas that became more apparent for what we needed. Robert Moody, who is the interim president right now, has done a fabulous job, and we really wanted to work around his skill sets to make sure that we utilize him to the fullest of his abilities and serve the school by finding somebody that would really complement him and his senior leadership. So it did evolve a little bit, but our view was that in looking at the applicants, it became kind of a process of looking at the applicants and looking at what we have and what would best complement the staff.
So you had numerous applicants.
We did.
Okay. And of these applicants, were there not individuals who both fit that outward-facing role as well as fit many of the criteria for which you originally advertised the job for, with an extensive education background, experience in that field?
I will say there were no applicants that fit it to a T. So it became clear as we went through the applications that we needed to really prioritize what was important for us and kind of look at the strengths of each applicant and weigh how that would most benefit Good Will-Hinckley. So there was nobody that we could say, check, 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 this is the guy or this is the woman. It became clear as we went through the process that we needed to reflect on the qualifications of the applicants and arrive at who we felt would best complement the staff that we had.
A whole question.
Thank you. If I could first, I don't think any of us is second guessing your unanimous board decision on who you felt was appropriate to lead the institution. I've counted, I think, 17 different interactions you had sort of with somebody from state government with respect to this hiring decision. I'm not going to go through each one of them one by one, but let me lay out what looks like happened here and ask you to react. Okay?
Sure.
That the board unanimously decided to hire Speaker Reeves as its next president. That the governor learned of that decision. The governor reacted negatively and through himself and through other representatives from his office essentially said, if you hire Speaker Reeves, that your funding from the state is very much in jeopardy. That triggered the Alfond Foundation to question its own continuing commitment if there were no longer going to be state funding. And in light of that, your board made the decision in its fiduciary capacity that it would have to withdraw its offer to Speaker Reeves and look elsewhere. Is that a fair summary of what happened here, sir?
From a very high level, I would say that some of the parts maybe weren't as explicit, but we did react to our interactions with the state government and also other parties where other portions of our funding became in question.
The Alfond Foundation in particular.
Yeah.
And so, is there anything I just said though that you would quarrel with?
We did look to elect, we did vote for Mark Eves. Part of the funding did come into question from the state, so you're correct there. I would say from a high level, that's correct.
Thank you. Representative Stracchio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You kind of asked what I was going to ask, but I guess, were you the person, Mr. Moore, that received the handwritten communication from the governor's office, and you don't have that anymore?
Right.
Can you tell us in your own words exactly what that said? And when we I've gotten a personal note from the governor, and I saved it, and I can remember what it said. So I would really appreciate, because usually they're pretty short and concise.
Well, there's never been a question if I didn't remember what it said. The note said that I believe he recognized a note that I had written to him that I was working hard to minimize the effect on Hinckley by both sides. And I wrote a letter trying to, I would say very positive, trying to send things in a direction of a very diplomatic, perhaps, dialogue. His response was a handwritten note. It did suggest that he would have trouble supporting Hinckley. I would say the letter that he wrote had no information that the formal letter that was written days later had, that in light of hiring Mark Eves.
Yes, Representative.
In your own words, I would like to know specifically what that said. What he said, because he does have a very concise way of saying it, and I imagine he didn't say it in quite so many words. So I would really appreciate, for the record, you telling us what he said.
The one element the one element that he did say is that he would have trouble supporting Good Will-Hinckley if we were to hire. And I believe there was 2 words, and one of them was scribbled out, but he did refer to him as a hack. Mark Eves. It was a short burner, as you said.
Thank you. Senator Diamond and then Chairman Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to drill down just a little bit on the question that Senator Cates. After reading the report, my memory is that, in fact, the board did have an indication of the governor's displeasure with hiring the speaker before the May 15th unanimous vote. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
So the board did know the governor was upset, as the report suggested or told us.
Yeah.
And that was on May 15th when the vote was taken. Once the pressure increased, however, regarding the governor's opposition, after the May 15th unanimous vote,
The vote to hire?
Did you then, in a meeting with the Commissioner of Education, offer the Commissioner the job a week later, on May 22nd, as reported?
No. I had a meeting, so to back up a little bit, the board had voted that Mark Eves was the guy that we selected. He was not hired until things were negotiated with respect to, and a contract was signed. And I firmly believe that that's the case, that Mark Eves was the guy that we would like to hire, and he was not hired until we finalized that part of the process.
I understand that minutiae, but the vote was taken on May 15th to hire him.
Right, yep.
And I just wanted to clarify, did in fact then you offer the job to the
No,
commissioner?
so I had a meeting with the commissioner. I believe it was a lunch meeting that was organized well before this. And it did come up because, I did have concerns that this could be something that could impact Hinckley. I mean, everything that we've done is about serving Hinckley's best interest as a fiduciary. And I was curious. The commissioner seemed like somebody I could be a little candid with, to ask, how he felt about Mark Eves. Certainly, I didn't get the feeling that it was positive. So I was curious onto, what direction did they think that we should have gone. He certainly had answers for that. They were very direct. And I don't recall, but I wouldn't be surprised if his levels of enthusiasm and his levels of lack of approval left me with the notion, is this something you're interested in? That would probably be the only context that I would ask that. I don't recall asking it, so I can say it certainly wasn't a meaningful part of the conversation. It wasn't an agenda, it wasn't an offer.
And then the other part of the report that was stuck with me a bit was your statement that the hiring was not a political hiring, that was not a consideration. And I want to just have you clarify that, since the previous hire was a former Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
Would it not be natural for people to think, well, here's another opportunity to hire a former Speaker of the House and all the benefits that might go with that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with saying our board is well represented by both sides of the aisle. This was not an opportunity for us to partner with either party. We maintained political independence. Glenn Cummings happened to be the previous person. It might be what encouraged him to apply. I don't know, and that could be part of the equation. This is an outward-facing job. This is somebody that needs to be our spokesperson. The speaker is a good speaker, and that was a skill set that attracted to us. It entailed raising money. Our view was that you could probably raise money. So it was not one where we gave consideration to wanting to have a politician represent Good Will-Hinckley. It was, politicians tend to have the skill sets of being good public speakers, and that's a key part of this. We have a great staff that can manage the on-campus going-ons of Good Will-Hinckley. We need somebody that was outward-facing, and as I'm sure you know, he's got a good skill set for outward reflecting communication.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming, Mr. Moore. We really appreciate your willingness to come down. I'm trying to get to a better understanding of how your relationship with, I assume most of your relationship with the governor during this time was through interim Commissioner Desjardins, am I correct? Most communications came that way?
Yeah, there would be an occasional aide or that I would converse with.
Senator Diamond mentioned the May 22nd lunch in Hallowell. After you read this report, was there any consistency with your perception of that lunch versus what you read in the report in which the commissioner felt he was being offered the job that had already been?
Yeah.
I mean, that just jumped out at me, and I'm trying not so much the details of that lunch. I'm more interested in your general sense of what you were getting from this gentleman because we hope to speak to him when he's in better health. And so I'm just curious about that. I mean,
that did jump out at me, and again, I would say that, you know, when you're treading on eggshells and trying to appease everybody involved, you know, one thing's for sure is Hinckley has not seeked a limelight here. And we've tried to minimize any anxiety from any parties. So that's our skill set, and that's what we've been aiming to do. So this has been a long exercise in diplomacy. And when you're talking to somebody that's articulating perhaps a challenging perspective, you know, taking a big step in the direction of diplomacy entails asking, so who would you like? What were your thoughts on this? And while I certainly don't recall saying, would you like the job? And it was not a job offer, it was not a means to go down that road. But it wouldn't surprise me if I said, is this something that you're interested in? And it would be along the lines of diplomacy, not looking to refill the job.
Mr. Moore, I wanted to ask a question about the Alfond Foundation, if I could. Because you learned that the state funding was very much in jeopardy if you hired speaker leaves. But the next shoe that dropped was, now you heard from the Alfond Foundation that if the state funding wasn't going to be there, that maybe the Alfond funding wouldn't be either. And in fact, that money was much more than the state appropriation was. My question is, do you know how the Alfond Foundation learned that this was going on? It seems as though there were communications to you from the Alfond Foundation before this matter became public. How did they learn about it?
Communications. You know, I talk to them on a regular basis. They're a very important constituent and a big supporter. I will say that we didn't need the letter from the Alfonds to know that we were in trouble with the funding there. The Alfonds grant came with very well-articulated stipulations about maintaining financial integrity. And an assessment was done prior to getting the first installment of the Alfonds grant, and we passed, but it wasn't by a landslide. So the board knew that a change to this degree would likely jeopardize our ability to maintain the metrics that the Alfonds were requiring. So in respect of that, you know, we did try to keep a dialogue with them, and so I think that they were aware of developments probably throughout. I must have talked to Greg at least once, maybe twice, prior to that.
So whether they learned it from you or from perhaps someone in the governor's office or some other place, you don't really know, is that what you're saying?
Well, it could be for me. I'm sure some of it they learned from me. I mean, that was, I think my role is to embrace
Mr. Moore, you're represented here by one of the best lawyers in Maine, Mr. Nuzzi. Don't you want to object to a question along the way?
I'm ready and waiting if the need arises.
Representative Mastracchio and then Representative Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just trying to figure out at what point you realized that the governor or the governors was going to influence this process, though, and that at what point you realized that there was an issue, because was it when you had the lunch with the commissioner, the acting commissioner of education? Was it when somebody contacted you? I mean, it didn't just come all of a sudden, because you were going through this process. It was a process that the report says was fair, thorough. You know, the candidate rose to the top. It was, you know. So I guess I'm just trying to ask, at what point? Was it when you got the no's Was it when somebody called you? When did you realize that the influence was going to be, there was going to be some punishment, call it what you want, punishment for, if you hire the speaker, this is what's going to happen to you. So at what point did that dawn on you? I mean, that I'm really having a problem with. Having that clarity isn't there, and it's hard in the report because we get some differing stuff. So there must have been like a moment where the light bulb went on and went, whoa, we're in deep trouble here. What am I going to do? And when was that, and how was that communicated to you?
Thank you. I will say that I thought the Opega staff did a pretty thorough job of putting the report together. There were a few revelations for me. I'm not on top of every aspect of all the moving parts, but all in all, I thought it was a fairly well-written report. You know, when did we know? You know, throughout the interview process, we did implement another round of interviews in the process to really dive into, is this going to be a problem? So we explored this from you know, early on to try to make sure that we're not we're hiring somebody that can be effective on both sides of the aisle and be most effective for Good Will-Hinckley. The meeting with the commissioner, I would phrase as a yellow flag, certainly not a red flag. I would say probably the red flag came from our interim president, Rich Abramson, who I believe did get a call or get a direct communication from the governor. But I think my recollection, and I'm not, you know, this summer has been a blur because there's been a lot going on for Good Will-Hinckley. It certainly has been for a long time. But it became less opaque, I would say, as the governor's formal letter came out that he didn't approve of Mark Hughes. I wouldn't say that the board construed it as a punishment. We looked at it as he's taking action because he doesn't approve of the hire. So certainly at the formal letter, things became pretty evident that we needed to act. And it wasn't the funding alone that resulted in us, the funding was $530,000 from the governor. It was the fact that that put in jeopardize another source of significant funding. And absent that, that could put us in default of a loan. And it basically triggered, and I don't know how much people, much less Mark Eves, knew that this series of events could be triggered. And throughout this process, we were focused on fulfilling our fiduciary duties. And we would not have been doing that if we were to go down the road of leading to a series of defaults that would put the existence of Hinckley in question.
Just two follow-up questions. First, so you truly believe, though, that the one, so you talked about that, the effect of one on the other. You believed then that that is in fact what would have happened, is that the money withheld by the governor then would lead to money that would then be held Alfond, and then in fact you would lose the
yeah, it was definitely a series of events, and that would transpire. The board did feel that we didn't have to act immediately because July 1st was kind of the date that we had to act by. So I think that we did a good job of remaining objective, of not operating on a schedule that would prevent us from consistently acting in the school's best interest.
And did you show the note to anybody else, Mr. Moore?
maybe my wife, but I'm not sure. Nobody, it didn't leave the house, I can say that.
I'm not saying the dog ate it.
Yeah.
Representative McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I've actually been at the school a few times over the last 5 years. I'm on the education committee, so I was in the room when we first started talking about monies, and I don't think we can say enough what a good job you guys do. If any people walk out, they realize that a good thing happens at that school.
Thank you.
I have two questions. One is back to the reports we had. Do you know who gave the Alfond letter, the foundation letter that you received to the press? Was that something the board did, or speaker's office, or do you have any idea how the press got hold of that letter?
I do not know. I wouldn't. I know that we didn't. I didn't.
Oh, guess you did. All right. Second question. If you're a baseball fan like myself, there's been a lot of screwy plays, a lot of conjecture plays this week, where everybody looks at it and there's like 7 different explanations, and that's kind of what we're doing here. I think is this weird thing has happened, and I try to think about it as did something bad happen, or is this just politics? Is this just the way the game is played? I mean, I watch people go into leadership offices and kind of crying, so I think this happens a lot. So my question to you, if you're willing to answer it, is in your view, is this whole thing really the political process and just the way it goes and we just have to play the game, or do you really feel like there was a threat to your school?
Well, absent the funding, it would have been threatening for the school. I've really avoided, and hopefully this committee and all appreciates that myself and the board have avoided taking political sides. We're truly apolitical, and if there's one thing that you can see is that the board is well represented on both sides, and we have gone out of our way to keep our heads down and to not fan the flames in this process. So I respect the question, and I guess we're 0-2. I apologize.
No, and I asked last meeting. I asked actually Beth if this all happened just the course of the political process, Republican, Democrat foolishness, budget stuff. And at the end of the day, you guys, no one said boo, but you guys got no money. Would we be sitting here having this meeting? And after a long pause, the answer was no, we wouldn't be here. It would just be just part of the process. So that's kind of where my question was coming from. Is this just the way we play?
All right.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Sanderson.
In regard to the state funding, I'm reading very carefully through the Alfond letter here and trying to tie it back to the report, and then also with the ethics report that came out, which was requested by Speaker Reeves regarding whether there would be a conflict of interest in voting, et cetera, trying to put the whole pieces together. In this report, in October of 2012, there was discussion of not including funding for Good Will-Hinckley in the 14-15 budget. And this report says that Good Will-Hinckley established a 2-year plan to shore up your financial basis and essentially, and to become independent of this state funding, which the governor has been very pleased to support that school with. There's no question he has been a tremendous stalwart supporter of Good Will-Hinckley School since it was passed in 2011. I'm wondering, it's kind of a 2-part question here, or a 3-part maybe. What happened to that 24-month plan where you weren't able to become independent of the state funds? And then, in regard to the Good Will-Hinckley, as I'm reading the letter, it doesn't specifically say that it's going to be pooling funding. It merely says that they want to reevaluate your books to see that the stability is going to be there going forward. You just said it would put the school in jeopardy, yet in the ethics report, there's the indication that should the funding go away, the school would certainly still remain solvent. All different kinds of things coming at you. I know that's a loaded question. Can you kind of maybe shed some light on that? And also, even though you had that 24-month plan, in 2013, you hired a lobbyist to make sure that funding would remain in place. And then again in 2014, hired a lobbyist to make sure that funding would remain in place and included the funding from the state as part of your grant application to the Alfond Foundation. I know that went everywhere, but.
Yeah.
Maybe we should take it one question at a time.
Yeah. The plan to work independently of this funding was certainly a focus of Good Will-Hinckley all along. I think what became clear for our sustainability is that we needed to rebuild the school. We needed to grow enrollment. And we were curtailed on enrollment with the current environment that we had. There were a number of factors. I'll say that, you know, when I joined the Board of Hinckley, we had close to a $1 million deficit, and that's in 1 year. The school's made tremendous progress towards financial sustainability, and I think that remarkable success, particularly in the trajectory around 2012, led us to believe that perhaps we could get there. I think that we will definitely bring enrollment up to around 200 students. As we do that, we can allocate our fixed costs over a wider population, and you know, economics 101, that makes things a lot better for Good Will-Hinckley. So we were off by a little bit. With respect to, I know that our CFO at the time did indicate that he felt that we could work through this. I think that you'll have to ask him on his reasoning behind that. But what I can say for the board is it was clear to us that we barely, we passed the scrutiny for the grant, and not with flying colors the first time. And that absent this funding, we felt it was prudent to assume that we would not be able to pass that. So when we got word of an assessment, you know, we don't need for them to close the door on the funding formally. It would be imprudent for us to not act, given this heads up that there's an assessment. And again, you know, with the governor's funding, it didn't need to be an explicit order that we would not get our funding for us not to react. I think it would have been imprudent to just wait for the chips to fall. So the board was very proactive. We felt on both fronts there were reasonable threats or concerns to have to take proactive steps at the appropriate time to address our funding.
Thank you. Senator Burns. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative, are you done?
I just one follow-up
Sure.
question. According to the report, there was a lot of discussion about potential concerns that the governor would have should Speaker Eads be hired for this position. There was a lot of discussion, evidently, regarding potential funding loss. Yet you chose to go forward.
The
again, we chose to go forward in the beginning because we didn't have to make a decision at that time. And, you know, I think the board did a very good job of remaining objective and taking a step back and recognizing what we need to do now and what we need to do by particular dates. So our inaction immediately, I think, was a very thoughtful approach. And it's the byproduct of the fact that we weighed all of our options and explored all of our possibilities and didn't jump to a conclusion. And I think that while there's always going to be room to second guess any decisions, particularly as time goes on, I think it was a prudent path for the board to take.
Thank you. Senator Burns.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for being with us today. And I appreciate your diplomatic way of answering some of these questions. Some of them are very difficult, I realize that. My resolve today was to do a lot more listening and talk, but there's something that you've hit on 3 times now that really makes me curious, I guess, and that's kind of a follow-up to Representative Sanderson's question. You talked about the board made great effort to find somebody that was out-facing, someone who would represent the school and gain support in the community. And you also mentioned a couple of times that I think of a very well-balanced board as far as both sides of the aisle, very well equipped to make these decisions. Given all the history that your board certainly must have been aware of, and the angst, I guess, is the best way to put it, maybe between the governor and the speaker in the years prior to you making this decision, was that a concern for the board that maybe that type of decision selection might bring about this type of conflict that we're facing right now? Or does that ever become part of the conversation and the screening process?
We certainly didn't envision being here, I'll say that, I know that for sure. We did feel that there was a potential risk, and that's why we injected a 3rd round of interviews to kind of flesh that out, and we did explicitly ask Mark. We had a number of issues. You know, one, we would be commuting, 100 miles a day or 150 miles a day. There were a few things that we needed to flesh out as board members, and we certainly wanted to make sure that we had somebody that would be fully engaged to do the job. We explored and we asked at various times about the relationship with the governor. I will say that I wish I had better color on this. My perception is that, you know, we're kind of entering a perfect storm here, and I think at the time that we were going through this process, it was probably the height of the storm between maybe the governor and Mark and his party. And, that certainly didn't make things easier. I will say I'm not going to second guess the answers I got. I will say that I feel perhaps things have changed from the starting process to the ultimate decision making today.
Thank you. Representative Shane.
Thank you, Senator. What we're really digging down to, I guess, is this is public money and how it was spent or not spent, and public employees paid for by the public administering this money. So there's a whole public process that happens before money is ever given to anybody. There are qualifications that are set. The recipient has to be deemed to be qualified. So was there a claim from the governor's office or from the governor himself or the acting commissioner that hiring Speaker Eves would trigger a failure to meet the qualifications that you would heretofore met in order to receive this money in the first place? Any claim that you were failing to meet the qualifications for which you got the money?
You know, it was a series of conversations that definitely left a strong impression that we have trouble supporting. Again, we viewed that as financial support. And they did indicate that they felt the reasoning was not political but objective and based on qualifications. That was the extent of the conversations going back and forth.
So the school met certain programming needs that the state wanted to address in its own budget. And so you met those qualifications. Hiring Speaker Eves meant that you no longer met those qualifications, according to the governor's office? I think, and I'm just kind of summarizing a series of conversations that they felt they would be responsible in supporting us.
Thank you. Chairman Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to see if I can flip my friend Senator Burns' question on its ear a little bit and ask for your personal opinion on this. Do you think it's appropriate and proper for a state chief executive to insert himself into the internal affairs of an institution?
Well,
Mr. Moore's here as a volunteer. We're the only ones that have come here today. He's obviously given a lot of time to this, but I
Just
think
as
his
personal
opinion. I understand that. So you're trying to remain above the political fray. I think that's kind of throwing him right in there.
Mr. Moore,
I will say that I have been trying very hard to minimize myself in the middle of this. So I appreciate your intervention, and if you respect that, that's helpful.
thank you. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Patience. Given statute, bylaws, etc., where does the sole authority for making hiring and firing decisions, the President of Good Will-Hinckley, rest?
With our board, the board of the Good Will-Hinckley.
And the decisions that were made, obviously, they seek input from other parties. And is it correct to assume, based on, I would think from the information we have, but I'd like to hear from you, that you did receive some feedback from the governor, among other parties?
We did. I mean, the process was very inclusive. It included the means board to some degree. It included staff and teachers to some degree. At the end of the day, I would say there was probably input more on the second round, maybe recommendations, but on the first round, I think that the disapproval with Mark Eves was the extent of the input, aside from the lunch with the commissioner.
And so, would it be correct to say that after considering all of the inputs that they chose to in that process, the board, having the sole authority to make that decision, chose to hire Mark Eves as their next president?
Any other questions for Mr. Moore? Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. I believe you were shared the question. In the last part of the report here, there were some impacts to Good Will-Hinckley events transpiring, and some of them refer to loss of donations to the school. I believe these would probably be from individuals, and then some negative correspondence. And I believe it's indicated that you were going to be prepared to maybe share some of that today. Was all the negative correspondence, was that all in opposition to the governor expressing his displeasure?
I would say that it was predominantly aimed at lack of approval for us to ignore our fiduciary duties and to stand up to the government.
And some people have reached out to Good Will-Hinckley and pulled their donations to school. What donations would those be? I know you probably can't share individual names. I understand that. But if you can share to the extent that you could, that would be great.
We did get letters saying that, from previous donors saying we're no longer supportive. In general, we're trending well under, development is a large part for the institution, and I would say there's a number of factors involved, but we are trending below where we would expect to be.
With sensitivity of individuals who sent you correspondence, negative correspondence, would you be able to provide those with identifying criteria redacted, please? So they're not identified, but just so we could see the tone of the letter of that correspondence, would that be possible for you to provide to us?
Yeah, let me think about it. I mean, I think
Fully understanding that you would take any identifying information out of it.
I'll look at that.
Thank you. It would be wonderful if you could share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Guzovsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for coming in today. I have a couple of short questions, but they're kind of direct. I'm wondering, you've been on the board for a while, involved with the board for a while. Has anything like this happened in the past?
No.
Such as when you hired Speaker Cummings?
Speaker Cummings was hired just previous to my
Has the board ever reached out to the administration in the past for who was acceptable and who wasn't acceptable to be hired?
No. And the school has had a dialogue with the governor. That certainly would be part in the past as well as that.
I know with other boards that we all deal with on a regular basis, like your board, that often boards will have conversations with different members of the administration about upcoming prospects. And I'm wondering, and I know that that's been done in the past, and I'm wondering if that was done this time.
Certainly the candidates that we received were, I don't think any, had nothing to do with the governor's office. I will say both for the principal job and particularly for the second hiring, one thing that we wanted to do was to expand the pool of potential applicants. So as I mentioned, the first round of applicants, there was nobody that was check, that had everything. So one thing that we did do is we made it a point, both for the principal job and the executive director job, to look for who would have the ideal credentials and encourage them to apply. And we did do that. And I don't believe where we stand is the recommendation of the name in Augusta, but we did kind of beat the bushes to try to get the applicants that would maybe have more things checked and be somebody that might not normally be looking for a job, but be an excellent hire.
Okay, so in your history with the board, at no other time have you taken, have you made the names of the people that you're considering for a position part of the administration's
We did
veto
not vet
or not veto or like or not like or whatever?
Both rounds.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Although, that one conversation with the commissioner early on, that was not a conversation to vet. That was a conversation to kind of diplomatically present the notion that Marquis is a celestial.
Okay, but that wasn't searching for approval.
was hoping for approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Just remind the committee that we are still on Mr. Moore, and we have an awful lot of folks who've come probably from some distance to speak, so hopefully we can finish with you soon, sir. Senator Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that thought in mind, I will prove to you that I can be brief. Mr. Moore, thank you for being here. First question I have, I'm curious, donations to Good Will-Hinckley or schools of that type, they add public information?
Probably not. I wouldn't think so.
So,
maybe if it was directed to me, and it might be, but my understanding is that Colby doesn't disclose every single donation. I could be wrong.
Colby is a private school,
Yeah.
not funded by taxpayer money.
You're right.
I think that would be perhaps a different
My
avenue.
perception is, and I could be wrong, I'll look it up and we'll try to get back to you if there's a couple of information.
You felt correspondence between the school and the administration had to be forthcoming. Is in effect public. You provided good.
Yeah, we certainly provided it, yeah.
If I could, take you back to the dinner date or the lunch date that you had with the acting commissioner. My understanding of what you said was that you didn't offer the position to him, but perhaps inadvertently or in passing you might have said, do you want the job or something like that.
I might have asked if he's interested.
Could he possibly have taken that differently?
Apparently.
Well, the investigative report,
Yeah.
Vega did.
Yeah,
He
well, I'm glad
says
he didn't
that,
quit his job because
Yeah.
it wasn't really an offer.
well, he says that he was left with the impression that,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think
Page 11.
like the CFO has a different impression about the sustainability absent the 500,000. You know, this is my view, and I certainly left it open that he might have that perception, but it certainly wasn't, I wasn't going to come back to my board and say, stop the press, you know.
it's safe to say his interpretation, his impression was different than your intentions.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
that happens.
Absolutely, it happens. It certainly does. Did you have any other meetings, direct meetings, face-to-face?
I might have met with them once, or once with the governor. That's where I got to know him.
And subject of him possibly coming to work, I
No,
take it didn't come
no.
up in any other conversation that you had?
No, he certainly had a very sincere interest in Good Will-Hinckley, and that's something that stuck with me.
Well, thank you, and Mr. Nussing, I'm sure that when Senator Cates spoke to you about the desire to interrupt or to object, he was referring to anything I might have to say. I noticed you guys stick together pretty close. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will be brief, but I do need to clarify this clarification on something you said. You used, in response to Representative McClellan's question, you used the word threatening, that you felt there was a threatening process here. Did you feel that the school was threatened to the point it would be closed down if you got the disapproval in this instance from the governor?
We felt if we didn't have the funding, that could very potentially trigger a series of events that would conceivably result in the school closing down. And that is why the board, as fiduciaries, took the steps that we did. Yeah.
Thank you for that. By the way, thank you for being here. I just think that's very, very kind of you to take the invitation to be here. And lastly, you had said that the school and the board are apolitical. My experience in this business has been around a little bit. It says when you start taking state dollars, that's not apolitical. And when you hire a lobbyist, that's not apolitical. And when you hire prominent people, maybe some of the more prominent politicians in the state, not once but twice. That's not apolitical. So I say that as a basis to say that your perceptions are very, very important in this whole process. And what you think and what you feel about what happened here is an integral part of us finding the facts. And that's all we're here for, is simply to find facts. So I leave that with you if further questions come, and understand why we probe and so interested, because you've come forth, you're very prominent, and the job you have is also a key player in this investigation.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Any further questions? Representative Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore. And I just want to commend Good Will-Hinckley and all its progress in the right directions. Good and sustainable living and troubled students, your marriage with KVCC, campus real estate or location is putting education in the right direction. We really appreciate what you're doing. I'm interested in the outward facing piece and the evolution of the job description as it came forward relative to the applicants. And makes a lot of sense. I worked with Glenn Cummings on some real estate issues on the campus, and he did a great job, really good job. But one of the intriguing comments that I was left with in talking with him was how amazed he was and how much a believer he had become, basically opposing charter schools and private schools in the past, and how he was on board and was right there. So as you went down through the list of these potential applicants, thinking that each of these leaders in these parties or in these political positions generally have the best luck raising funds, and as you mentioned, a politician is good speaking and raising money. As you looked at this particular applicant and his contacts and potential fundraising opportunities, basically in opposition of charter schools over the years, did you have any dialogue with that concern in hiring this individual at the board level?
We did, and I think ultimately it came out that clearly he's a supporter of Good Will-Hinckley. I think Hinckley is a little bit different than many charter schools. The hands-on teaching and service to many at-risk youth. We did ask him several times. His views were consistent with what Hinckley does, and he certainly felt that they were.
So you felt that his fundraising experience was broad enough, so it didn't rely on what his catapulting experience was, so he could get beyond his normal contacts?
For fundraising, we were viewing it not as fundraising in the state. I will say, going from $1 million deficit to financial sustainability is one clear thing that we don't want to do, and to make ourselves subject to survival by the political process. So the school is working very hard to continue on that trajectory of financial sustainability. And we'll still get support absent this 2-year process of weaning ourselves off of this $530,000. But the goal is certainly in financial sustainability is to not present yourself with the risk of being too dependent on one source, be it state funding, federal funding, development even, and have all expectations for all sources of revenue be consistent with sustainability. So our view on him being a good fundraiser was he's a personable fella, he's comfortable with people and speaking. So particularly on my view, it was more on the development side, because our goal is to make sure that our sustainability entails the adequate amount of state funding, but nothing more.
Thank you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Representative. Representative Sanderson.
Thank you. I have to apologize. I was jotting down a note, so I missed the first part of a comment. You referred to even those who may not be looking for a job. I missed the first part of that comment. Were you indicating that you were perhaps doing outreach to individuals for this position as well? Yes. So, pardon?
Yes. In the second round.
And the second round was when? Was that before the March deadline for applying for the job? Was there a March deadline?
No, this is more recently, the last 2 or 3 months.
Okay. But you weren't doing outreach prior to?
We probably should have, but no. We might have done minimal outreach, but we made it a point to say, particularly at the same time we were hiring a principal, we were enormously successful in finding who we feel is one of the best principals in the state, particularly for what Good Will-Hinckley does. And what we found was not just resting with who has the resume built up, but asking around who's most qualified and who would fit what we need certainly served us well. So we're in the process of doing a search for an executive director. And for that position, we felt, let's take a step back and ask people like Lori LaChance, who we think the world of, and somebody that's been such a tremendous success for Thomas College. Who can we get to be somebody like that? And who might not have the resume, but might say this is an excellent opportunity to make a difference in a great institution.
Well, Ms. LaChance already obviously has an extensive resume regarding education and has done a fine job where she is. What prior to your taking the hot seat, if you will, it was the conversation in an interview with Mr. Brown, who is a staffer, speaker, was shared with us. And it was said that it was Mr. Brown evidently told the OPEGA staff during, some questions that it was, I believe, the interim president who suggested that he perhaps reach out to Speaker Eves, the very last bit in March, and let him know that this job was available. Would that have been outreach?
I don't have any information on that.
Okay.
I can't answer that.
All right. All right.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Representative Scarpio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, just one quick question. So absent the insertion of the executive branch into a hiring process that OPEGA has characterized as fair and thorough, would Mark Eves be the president of Good Will-Hinckley today? If that all hadn't happened, who would be president of Good Will-Hinckley right now?
Had we not been in jeopardy of losing the state funding, I would think that Mark Hughes would be the president.
Thank you very much. I think we've now exhausted our questions. Mr. Moore, thank you very much for being here. I'd like to remind everybody you were here voluntarily today. We really appreciate that. We learned a lot from you this morning. And we all wish you the best of luck going forward. So, thank you very much. So we will now continue with this public hearing. And again, Mr. Moore is the only one invited who's here this morning. So we're now going to move on to the public hearing phase.